For over a century, St. Helena's convent had stood as a beacon of purity, a sanctuary where women dedicated their lives to faith, prayer, and service. But now, an unsettling silence loomed over the sacred halls. The air, once filled with hymns and whispered prayers, carried a heavy tension. No one dared to speak of it aloud, yet everyone knew something was terribly wrong. Welcome back to my channel. Get ready for a shocking story filled with mystery, betrayal, and unexpected twists. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an incredible story like this one. One by one, the nuns were falling pregnant. It was impossible, unthinkable. This was a place of strict devotion, where the outside world barely touched their existence. And yet, medical reports did not lie. Someone, somehow, had violated the very essence of this convent's sanctity. Sister Maria, the eldest and most revered nun in the convent, sat motionless in the dimly lit chapel, her trembling fingers clutching yet another medical report. The ink on the page blurred as tears welled in her tired eyes. This was not just a sin. It was a scandal that could shatter everything they had built. Meanwhile, Bishop Alexander, the authoritative figure overseeing the convent, paced his study in shock. His hands trembled as he read the latest report. Not one, not two, but multiple. This cannot be happening. His mind raced. If the truth got out, the convent's reputation would be destroyed. With urgency in his steps, he stormed toward the chapel. His heart pounded, not just with fear, but with a terrifying realization. Whatever was happening in St. Helena's convent was not random. And if the truth ever came to light, it would not just shake the convent. It would destroy lives. Bishop Alexander's footsteps echoed through the silent corridor as he rushed toward the chapel. His mind was in turmoil. He had overseen St. Helena's convent for decades, ensuring its strict devotion to faith and purity. But now, something unspeakable had happened under his watch. Who was responsible? How could this happen in a place where men were strictly forbidden beyond the gates? As he pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the chapel, he found Sister Maria still seated, her hands trembling as she gripped the medical report. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with something he had never seen before. Fear. How many more, Maria? His voice was low but firm. She hesitated before answering, her voice barely a whisper. 6. 6 confirmed pregnancies so far. A wave of shock ran through him. 6? This was not a coincidence. Someone had done this deliberately. Sister Maria's hands tightened around the paper. They are scared, Father. Some of them are so ashamed they refuse to speak. Others claim they have no memory of anything happening to them. Her voice broke. It is like they just woke up pregnant. Bishop Alexander swallowed hard. Something sinister was at play here. But before he could say another word, the chapel doors creaked open again. A younger nun, Sister Beatrice, stepped inside, her face pale as if she had seen a ghost. She clutched a small envelope in her hands. This was left outside the convent gates this morning, she whispered, holding it out. Bishop Alexander took the envelope, his fingers unsteady as he pulled out a folded note. His breath caught as he read the words written in neat, almost elegant handwriting. The truth is buried within these walls. But for how long? His grip on the paper tightened. Someone was watching them, and whoever it was, knew everything. Bishop Alexander's pulse quickened as he stared at the ominous note. The words felt like a warning. No, a threat. Someone knew what was happening inside St. Helena's convent, and they were toying with them. Sister Maria's face turned pale as she read the note over his shoulder. Who could have written this? No outsiders have access to the convent. Sister Beatrice took a shaky breath. Unless... She hesitated, looking at them with wide, fearful eyes. Unless it is someone inside. The words sent a chill through the air. The idea was terrifying. Was one of their own responsible for this horrifying secret? Bishop Alexander clenched his jaw. We need answers, and we need them now. He turned to Sister Maria. Bring me the names of all 6 nuns. I want to speak to each of them personally. Sister Maria nodded and hurried out of the chapel. The bishop turned to Sister Beatrice. Has anyone else received anything suspicious? Any letters, gifts, or… He paused, searching for the right words. Any threats? She shook her head. Not that I know of. But some of the younger nuns have been acting strange, withdrawn, as if they are afraid to talk. A heavy silence fell between them. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than just a scandal. This was a mystery buried deep within the walls of the convent, and someone among them, knew the truth, and they were making sure it stayed hidden. The heavy wooden doors of Bishop Alexander's office creaked open as Sister Maria entered, clutching a folded paper. Her hands trembled as she placed it on his desk. These are the names of the 6 affected nuns, she said softly. The bishop unfolded the paper and read the list. The names were familiar. Young, devoted women who had taken vows of chastity. His chest tightened. How could this happen under God's roof? Before he could speak, a knock interrupted his thoughts. The door pushed open, revealing Sister Eleanor, one of the youngest nuns from the list. Her face was pale, her hands clenched together. "Father, I need to talk to you," she whispered. Bishop Alexander motioned for her to sit. "Tell me, child. What do you know?" Tears welled in her eyes. She hesitated, as if battling an inner war. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said something that made his blood run cold. "I see him in my dreams." The bishop's fingers tightened around the arms of his chair. "Who?" Sister Eleanor's breathing became uneven. "A man. I do not know his face, but he is always there, in the darkness, whispering, touching. And then I wake up. And weeks later, I found out I was…" Her voice cracked. "Pregnant." The room fell into a deafening silence. Bishop Alexander's mind raced. None of this made sense. Was it a trick of the mind? A shared delusion? Or was there something far more sinister lurking in the shadows of St. Helena's convent? One thing was certain. This was no ordinary scandal. It was something far darker. And whoever was behind it was still here, watching, waiting. Bishop Alexander's heart pounded as Sister Eleanor's trembling voice filled the room. A shadowy figure in dreams? Whispers in the dark? This was not normal. This was something beyond human understanding. Sister Maria placed a comforting hand on Eleanor's shoulder, but her own face was drained of color. "You are not the only one," she murmured. "Some of the other nuns. They have spoken of the same dreams." The bishop inhaled sharply. "Why did no one report this sooner?" Sister Maria lowered her gaze. "Because they thought it was just nightmares, and because they were ashamed." A chill crept into the air. If multiple nuns were experiencing the same terrifying visions that somehow led to pregnancy, then this was no ordinary crime. This was something unholy. Bishop Alexander turned back to Eleanor. "These dreams, do you ever recognize the surroundings? The place where it happens?" She hesitated before nodding. "Yes, always the same place. A room with stone walls, a high ceiling, and…" Her breath hitched. "A cross, but the figure on it is not Christ." Silence fell like a heavy weight. The bishop felt an icy dread settle in his bones. Sister Maria whispered, "Father, there is only one place in the convent that matches that description." Bishop Alexander knew it too. The sealed chamber beneath the convent, the one that had been locked for over a century. Something ancient was buried in this place, and it was waking up. Bishop Alexander felt the weight of Sister Maria's words settle deep in his chest. The sealed chamber. It had been locked away for over 100 years, untouched, forgotten. No one alive had ever set foot inside. Yet somehow, the nuns were dreaming of it. And worse, something inside that room was reaching out to them. He stood abruptly. "We need to see it, now." Sister Maria hesitated. But Father, the chamber has been sealed for generations. We do not even know where the key is. The bishop's gaze darkened. Then we will break it open. A tense silence followed. Then, Sister Maria nodded. Without another word, they made their way through the dimly lit halls of the convent, Sister Eleanor trailing closely behind. As they descended deeper into the building, the air grew heavier, colder. The once familiar corridors seemed foreign, as if they were walking into a place untouched by time. At last, they reached the lowest level, a stone-walled hallway that led to a massive iron door, rusted, unyielding, and sealed shut with heavy chains. Sister Eleanor shivered. This place, it feels wrong. Bishop Alexander stepped forward, gripping the lock. It was old, but sturdy. Whoever had sealed this chamber had meant for it to remain shut forever. Sister Maria's voice was barely above a whisper. What if it was locked for a reason? The bishop did not answer. Instead, he turned to the wall and grabbed an old iron candle holder. With one swift motion, he slammed it down on the lock, once, twice, a third time. Crack! The lock shattered, the chains unraveled, clanking against the cold stone floor. A sudden gust of air rushed from beneath the door, extinguishing the candlelight in the hallway. And then, just as the bishop reached for the handle, Sister Eleanor gasped. From the other side of the door, something knocked back. A sharp, hollow knock echoed from the other side of the door. The sound was slow, deliberate, like someone, or something, was waiting. Sister Eleanor clutched Bishop Alexander's sleeve, her body trembling. Father, please, do not open it. But it was too late. The bishop's hand was already on the handle. His grip tightened as he pushed the heavy iron door forward. It groaned open, revealing absolute darkness beyond. A thick, stale air rolled out, carrying the scent of dust, damp stone, and something else. Something rotten. Sister Maria held up a lantern, its golden glow barely illuminating the vast chamber beyond. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, scriptures long forgotten, their meaning lost to time. But in the center of the room, something far more disturbing stood tall. A massive stone cross. But the figure nailed to it was not Christ. The face was twisted in agony, the mouth frozen in a silent scream. The figure's arms and legs were elongated, unnaturally so, and its hands had claws. Sister Maria gasped. This is not a holy place. Bishop Alexander felt a chill seep into his bones. This is a prison. Sister Eleanor let out a sudden cry and stumbled backward, clutching her stomach, her face contorted in pain. It is here. It is inside me. The lantern's light flickered wildly as the air grew thick, suffocating. A low whisper curled through the chamber, slithering around them like a serpent. It was not a language they understood, yet it seeped into their minds, filling them with an unspeakable dread. Then, the stone cross cracked. The sound was deafening, like bones snapping. The figure nailed to it shifted. A deep, guttural laugh rumbled through the air. Something ancient had just woken up. The sound of the cracking stone sent a shock wave through the chamber. Dust fell in soft clouds as the figure on the cross moved. Its twisted limbs twitched, and its hollow, sunken eyes snapped open. Sister Eleanor let out a choked sob, clutching her stomach as if something inside her was tearing her apart. It is inside me! It is inside all of us! Her voice was no longer her own. It carried an unnatural resonance, as if someone else was speaking through her. Bishop Alexander grabbed her shoulders. Eleanor, look at me! But her eyes had changed, no longer soft and brown, but a deep, endless black. A sudden wind surged through the chamber, snuffing out the lantern. Darkness swallowed them. Sister Maria screamed as a force threw her across the room, slamming her against the cold stone wall. Bishop Alexander barely had time to react before an unseen force ripped the breath from his lungs, shoving him to his knees. A voice filled the chamber, low, mocking, and ancient. You sealed me away, but I never left. The bishop's heart pounded. Who are you? he gasped, fighting against the unseen weight pressing down on him. The voice laughed, a dry, cruel sound that echoed through the walls. "I am the father of your children." Bishop Alexander's blood ran cold. His mind refused to process the horror of what he had just heard. The entity had not just haunted the nuns in their dreams, it had claimed them. The pregnancies, the unnatural conception, the same dreams. It had not been the sin of man. It had been something far worse, something ancient, unholy, and hungry. The figure on the cross broke free. A wave of suffocating darkness crashed over them, and then, silence. The silence that followed was unnatural, heavy, suffocating. The air was thick, pressing down on Bishop Alexander's chest like an invisible weight. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then, a breath. A deep, shuddering inhale that did not belong to any of them. The figure had freed itself. A flicker of torchlight danced across the chamber walls, revealing the impossible. The thing that had been trapped, the thing that called itself the father of the unborn children, was no longer bound. It stood before them, its body unnaturally long, wrapped in ragged strips of ancient cloth. Its hands, long clawed fingers, stretched outward as if welcoming them. Sister Eleanor gasped, her body contorting in pain. She fell to the ground, convulsing. Sister Maria rushed to her, gripping her arms, trying to shake her back to consciousness. "Eleanor, stay with me!" But Eleanor's lips parted, and she spoke in a voice that was not her own. "It is already done." Bishop Alexander forced himself to his feet. "What do you mean?" The entity tilted its head, its hollow eyes gleaming in the dim torchlight. "They are my vessels now. The children inside them. They are mine." A sickening chill ran down his spine. This was not possession. This was creation. The nuns had not been impregnated by human hands. They were carrying something else. Sister Maria's hands shook as she looked up at the bishop. "Father, what do we do?" The bishop's mind raced. The convent, the nuns, the unborn children. It was all part of something far bigger, far darker. And now, it had been unleashed. There was only one way to stop it. But as the entity took a step forward, its twisted mouth curling into something like a smile, Bishop Alexander realized one terrible truth. They were already too late. A terrible calm settled over the chamber, thick and suffocating. The entity stood before them, its presence warping the very air, making the walls feel like they were closing in. Sister Eleanor's body twitched violently, her fingers digging into the stone floor. Her stomach swelled unnaturally, the life inside her stirring. The other pregnant nuns, wherever they were, must have been experiencing the same thing. Bishop Alexander clenched his fists. He could not let this happen. He turned to Sister Maria. "We must perform an exorcism. Now." But the entity laughed, a deep guttural sound that echoed through the chamber. "You think prayers can undo what has already begun?" The walls trembled. The torches flickered violently. The ground beneath them cracked, as if the very foundation of the convent was rejecting them. Sister Maria began reciting Latin prayers, her voice trembling, desperate. "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." A sudden scream cut through the chamber. Sister Eleanor's body arched upward, her back bending in an impossible angle. Her mouth opened wide, but she was not screaming. Something was screaming from inside her. The entity stretched out a clawed hand. "They are already mine. The children will be born, and the world will remember what it tried to forget." Bishop Alexander's chest tightened. A horrifying realization struck him. This had happened before. The sealed chamber, the forgotten history, the reason the convent was built over this place. This was not the first time, and if they failed now, it would not be the last. "Forgive me, Lord," the bishop whispered. Then, with a surge of resolve, he grabbed the ancient oil lamp from the wall, the only thing left burning. Without hesitation, he threw it. The moment the flames hit the dry, rotting rags wrapped around the entity's form, the creature howled. The fire spread rapidly, licking up the chamber walls, consuming the carved scriptures, reaching the cross from which it had been freed. Sister Maria grabbed Eleanor, dragging her toward the exit. Bishop Alexander stumbled forward as the heat intensified, the entity writhing in agony, its voice turning into an unearthly screech. The convent shook. The stone walls cracked. The entire building was collapsing. As the three of them burst out of the chamber and into the corridor, the iron door slammed shut behind them, sealing the horrors inside once again. And then, silence. The fire raged behind the door, but no sound came from within, no screaming, no whispering, nothing. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Sister Eleanor's breath hitched. She placed a trembling hand on her stomach and gasped. The swelling was gone. The unnatural presence inside her vanished. It was over. Or so they thought. Because as the morning sun rose over the ruined convent, a single whisper drifted through the air, so faint, so distant that it could have been imagined. "I will return."